Well, thanks to my many viewers who recommended to me to pick up this monitor right here, the Gigabyte M32Q, and I do have a good experience with Gigabyte monitors. I've reviewed a few in the past, and I think this one will not disappoint. But I'll tell you right now, there's a little hidden gem on this monitor that you're not going to want to miss out on, and that's all coming up in today's video. So as I've always said, 1440p gaming is the sweet spot of PC gaming right now. And this monitor can attest to that with a lot of features and specs built in that traditionally in older generation monitors we just didn't have. By the way, this monitor here on the desk is a stand-in because I did have to send the M32Q back. It was just for review only. That being said, it is a 32-inch monitor in size. It has a fantastic design, much like the M28U, that aggressive back panel that's got a cool design to it. It does, of course, height adjust, swivel, and tilt for you. But notably, the specs are what impressed me the most, and it's the fact that it's 165 Hz with an overclock capability to 170 Hz. It's a 1 millisecond response time, 1440p HDR 400 monitor with KVM support. A pretty sweet OSD sidekick if you ask me. A fantastic menu for calibrating, which we will be getting into here in just a second. It is flicker free. It has their clear sound technology giving you speakers built into the device itself. And it does cover 94% of that DCI P3 color scale, just in case you want to be a bit more color accurate than some of the other monitors out there. Now, a couple other notable mentions would be the fact that it has a nice cable management on the stand itself. Another notable mention would be the fact that it is 350 nits of brightness. Now, that's not the brightest out there for 1440p monitors. There are plenty that are 400 and up. And then, of course, for you guys who want to know the I/O on the back, this bad boy has two HDMI 2.0s, one display port. It has USB-C. You'll get three USB 3.0s. And then, of course, that almighty 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. And that then brings us to the setup and menus, because if you know anything about getting a monitor and taking it out of the box, the first thing you want to do is set that bad boy up. Spend a little bit of time doing some calibrating. So I'm going to show you those menus and just what you can expect when you take this out and plug it into your PC. But before I do that, I want to let you know if you have any questions about this monitor, any other monitor that's on the channel or just out there available to buy, we have a fantastic Facebook group called Only Nerds by Techccessory. Go check us out on Facebook, join the group. We have discussions every single day around gaming, console gaming, PC gaming, gaming monitors, and all sorts of tech. So go check that out if you need a resource. Post any questions you have in there or comment on other people's questions if you have an answer. Otherwise, let's jump into the menus and setup. You know, as always, every single monitor comes a bit too bright out of the box, and we really have to dial it down. They want it to be in their brightest setting so you can see how bright it can get, but that's not always accurate. So, of course, with the Spider X, what I do is I calibrate brightness in the room, and then I get a good idea of the accuracy in color. And I gotta tell you, this is a very simple calibration. I didn't go too in depth on the Spider X here, but you can see as I pan back and forth between uncalibrated and calibrated, we're seeing a more natural tone to this girl's face here, and we're just getting a better color accuracy. Okay, now here's the big kicker. We want to know if this bad boy stacks up and actually matches the 94% DCI P3 color scale that Gigabyte claims. And we're going to start with the sRGB. And this guy is actually turning out fantastic, 100% of that sRGB. And then we switch over to NTSC at 81%, Adobe RGB at 85%. Ooh, and that DCI P3 is actually coming in at 90%. You know, I could probably go in and fine tune the brightness levels, maybe get a bit more of that peak brightness in there, and it'll cover more of that DCI P3. The problem is that the monitor is only 350 nits of peak brightness. You know, it's just not enough to drive that high-end brightness, those high, very bright reds and blues and greens. For now, we're gonna move on to the gray uniformity real quick. You know, and I see a slight bit of kind of like splotchy look, hazy look up in the top left corner there. And that can be partially because, of course, this is an edge-lit panel. You know, it's not looking terrible otherwise. So I'm going to speak off of experience on this one. The Gigabyte menus are probably my favorite menus. Hands down, they have the most calibration capability when it comes to SDR and HDR. And I know, believe me, I know HDR 400, especially with 350 peak nits of brightness, is not fantastic. But when you do want HDR to kick in, this monitor is going to give you some amazing menus. But some of the notable mentions would be the fact that it does do 6-axis color. It does do a black equalizer setting to manage your black level performance. It has fantastic overdrive settings that allow you to control it at 4 to 5 different levels if you want to consider off being a level. And then the final point there is the fact that when you're in HDR, it gives you 4 additional calibration menus on top of overdrive control and the FreeSync premium control, turning it on and off, which is not something that pretty much any other monitor gives you. So of course we can talk all day about the menus and the setup and the specs and kind of what I think, but the reality is we're gonna have to get into some real world benchmarking, and I always like to start that out with some blur busters. And I want to point something out here that I forgot to mention. This is an IPS monitor, and it also is overclockable to 170. So I'm gonna do a test here at 165 Hertz, and then of course I am going to jump up to 170 Hertz and do the rest of the testing. So let's dive in and see what we can find here. What we're getting is a teeny bit of overshoot, and then if we pause the second time, we can actually pick up a good amount of overshoot in any of the 3 frames per second, so high, medium, and low. Then we'll get into world motion blur here, and as we zoom in and pause, of course that bottom frame being the higher frames per second, what we see is actually a very good matchup between the bottom, higher frame per second, and top, which is the lower frame per second. It's actually holding up, at least in this test. Okay, so let's kick it up a notch to that 170 Hertz overclock mode. I know that was dramatic. But as we zoom in here and we take an initial pause, that middle frame and bottom frame are actually looking extremely well. That top frame, that 170 Hertz, is getting a bit of overshoot. So that kind of tells me, which we're about to get into, is maybe the pixel overdrive needs to be addressed a little bit. But in the front of world motion blur, as we take that pause, I mean, it's looking pretty much the same as the previous test, 165 Hertz. So that leads me to say that there's probably no reason you shouldn't have this overclock mode on. Well, this is where the rubber meets the road, in my opinion. This is the pixel overdrive test, and we're going to be testing from off all the way up to the highest setting on this Gigabyte monitor. And here we are, we have low, medium, high frames per second, top being the highest, middle being the middle, and bottom being the lowest. So let's jump in and see what our first test off provides us. Okay, much like we saw previously with the other test, that high frames per second, the 170 Hertz, is actually having some problem here with overshoot. And then we actually see introduced in the middle and bottom frame, we see a bit of smearing happening. And it's providing that same result no matter how many times I pause. And then the next setting is the smart overdrive, where it selects what pixel response rate or what overdrive setting should be utilized based on what's going on with the monitor. And that's worked pretty well for me in the past. So as we zoom in here and we take a little pause, what we see is it's still kind of giving us that smearing look, and it is overdrive heavy. You can see on the bottom frames per second, it's actually giving us some distorted pixels. It's not fully white where the UFO should be white. So it's kind of mushing or mashing multiple frames together here. So picture quality would put quality of the actual image before the frames per second. So I'm interested to see where this lands on this monitor. Hopefully it can be slightly better than the previous two. And we pause and we're pretty much getting the same result as before. We're getting a bit of overshoot happening here. Some of that pixel retention, not able to switch and keep up with those frames. And it could be a multitude of different reasons, but the reality is it's happening here. And we have to call it out. So this next one's a bit interesting because I think the name of it speaks for itself. It's called the balanced setting. You know, let me just say that I think that's the goal for all of us, right? Is to have a balance between quality in picture and quality of motion. You know, so far this balance is actually the best overall overdrive that I've experienced, at least in this test. There's very minimal ghosting here on the top frame, while the other two may suffer a teeny bit. It's much, much less than even that 170 Hertz. So it truly is kind of a balance because at any frame, whether it's high 165, 170 Hertz down to like 35, you're going to be getting a fantastic experience here with that balanced setting. And it stays true to that. Every time I pause, I'm getting that same exact result. But that's not what we're here for. We want the best possible pixel response rate that this thing can offer, so we pump it up to the speed setting. And let's see what we get. You know, and I've done multiple stops here, and what I will say is that the actual panning and motion looks pretty good to the naked eye. But every single time I pause, there is a bit of ghosting and overshoot happening. But it's not doing that crazy smearing thing it did in some of the other settings. So this might actually be a bit more of a crisp color, a bit more of a crisp picture if you do have it on the speed setting. But overall, I'm kind of leaning towards that balanced. We're about to jump into some real world gaming, but before we do, I want to let you know we have a fantastic channel built out for you. Go check it out, you guys. I'm telling you, there's fantastic playlists. Got a couple new ones up about monitors, console monitors, 1080p, 4K monitors, things like that. I'm going to be doing some other stuff as well, so go check out that homepage. Hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel. It's you guys who keep us going, and we absolutely want to keep going, so we appreciate those who have so far. But let's get into the real world gaming, starting with a bit of Warzone. So I'm a bit of a sucker when it comes to that resurgent drop-in Warzone, because the water is just that aqua blue and it has those different depths. They actually put a lot of effort into this, because if you notice off to the right, we get that deep dark blue, and then we get that bright aqua, almost like we're in the Caribbean or something. I know my shirt kind of makes it feel like we are, but we're just in a video game, okay? But I'm a sucker for this, and on this monitor, let me tell you, after I calibrated it, dropping in to Warzone like this, it just looked fantastic. I mean, the overall capability, the reflections, the color, even down to the rendering at far distances. You know, I know that has a lot to do with GPU, but you can have a fantastic GPU, but a terrible monitor, and it would never look this good. That being said, we're rocking that 170 hertz down here, and we're at the bottom of decon. And I will point out that, you know, we're in the bottom of decon, but it's still not too dark to actually play the game. You know, as I'm making my way through the corridor here, yeah, there's an opponent I'm about to come up with, but I can make out every single detail. You know, I can see him to the left of me. It's not too dark, it's not crushing that detail. And even in this scenario where it's kind of hard to make out what's behind the pillars here, the guy's kind of far away, not too far. With a monitor that doesn't have good contrast, you can't make out a character that's kind of ducked behind some other equipment, some other walls or barriers. You know, and this is another scenario. I'm with my teammates here. We're making our way up to prison, and we see some guys camping that rooftop with snipers. I mean, isn't that just kind of atypical? And I'm able to scope in and see this guy sitting on top of prison, and I'm even able to get some body shots on him to detract him from my teammates. And then I pull out the sniper. I end up getting shot once or twice, having to replay it up, go around to the side, catch his buddy off guard looking down at somebody else, snipe him, bam, right in the head. But as I do that, as I make that shot, I will point out that there was a bit of ghosting as I got that recoil. I don't think you'd really notice that, and I've already made the shot, so it's not that big of a deal. But you can see a bit of a double image happening here, double crosshairs, double text. But it goes away immediately after. I did want to point it out though, because it did happen. I mean, I saw it in the video. And even as we track this team down and try to take them out, I'm making my rounds, I'm sliding back and forth, I'm able to take pause and aim and see details in characters and take them out throughout that process. I'm even able to get somewhat of a quick scope on a guy, even though I only break his armor, I end up taking out one of his teammates. We almost took the team out. We almost got a team wipe, but we didn't. Not my fault. I did well. I mean, at least I think I did well. So this next one I haven't done in a while, and that's actually Borderlands 3. But I love Borderlands 3. The color behind it, that pop you get in those neon style colors, it's just fantastic. You don't really see that in many games. But what I want to test here is I want to test out motion, I want to test out color, if it's oversaturated or not. And then this game is actually pretty dark in some areas, so I want to check out shadow detail again. And as we launch in, we see a bit of motion blur as I'm doing my test to swivel back and forth. It's not terrible, but there is some there. But I pause again as I'm fighting this big boss here, and I'm using my shotgun on him, and I'm just blasting away at him. And in midair, as I pause, yeah, there's some world motion blur happening here. You can see in the background, focused right in on my opponent, I'm not getting any of that. You know what, I'll point something else out here. I've been getting anywhere from 60 to 120 frames per second, kind of dependent on what's happening in front of me. But the monitor's handling the FreeSync premium integration with NVIDIA G-Sync really well. So that variable refresh rate technology allowing the GPU to control the frames that the monitor is outputting is actually holding strong. 116 frames per second as I pause here, and we see just a very clear picture. Even as I'm over here fighting an entire team, I can make out detail far away, up close in the shadow detail. And it's pretty cool because we have a lot of specs, a lot of spots going on, things exploding near and far, and it's just making out that fantastic blue, those fantastic greens, a very good looking magenta, and I'm extremely pleased with the performance on here. So I won't take too much time on this next one, but this is a bit of Call of Duty Vanguard. Just because it's the newest release and many of you are playing this game, I wanted to take a few seconds to go over some of these interactions here. And the fidelity, I have to tell you, on this monitor, the fidelity is fantastic. I love this game because I can really dial in those settings and get a higher quality picture than in some of the other Call of Duty games. But motion handling here, you guys, I like jump up onto this truck and my guy's obviously shaking and moving, and I aim down sights at this opponent here as he's creeping around the corner. I'm getting body shots and headshots mostly. I take him out, pause in the middle of that, and it's just a perfect picture. And we're receiving 151 frames. Like, that is fantastic. If you can get 150 frames on a monitor like this at 1440p, this is going to be your gameplay. And the monitor, again, I'm using NVIDIA. The monitor handles it extremely well. Oh, I like this interaction here. This is a fun interaction. I gotta replay this. So I know this guy's camping around the corner. He's waiting for me, and this will be the last one, I promise. And I can hear him coming up. So I do a kind of circle around these boxes here and slide into place. And as I slide into place, he rounds that corner just as I expected. And what am I able to do? I'm able to aim down sights, lock onto him, take a couple shots, take him out entirely. And throughout that process, I'm getting 160 frames per second. That is winning material right there. You can do that every single time with certainty. I mean, if you're good enough, just like this shows here. And that was my experience through and through on Vanguard. So I'll probably move on to the next test. But I'll wrap up by saying that so far, I mean, this is scoring some serious points and should be a consideration or in your top 3 monitors, in my opinion, if it's not. So I have a little surprise for you coming towards the end of the video, something you'll want to stick around and watch if you use an AMD graphics card. But before we get into that, I want to test a bit of Metro Exodus Enhanced because I want to check out the fidelity. But this time through, I'm not actually going to turn on HDR because my experience with HDR on this monitor and most HDR 400 monitors is, you know, they generally look okay, they look decent. But because this has advanced calibration menus, I actually found that I could get SDR to look just as good, if not better, than HDR. So let's jump into Metro Exodus. We have ray tracing on, we have maximum fidelity and capabilities on this guy with 170 hertz. But let's see what we find in this game. Oh, and I love this scene. Oh yeah, I walk in and just twist this guy's neck from behind him. You know, motion handling's great. I'm receiving about 85 frames per second, but we're not seeing a lot of smearing here. This time I use a knife, I take him down, slice his throat, and blood goes everywhere. I mean, this game is graphic. It's pretty cool though. It's a lot of fun to play. If you haven't played it, you gotta play at least once through. Check it out. It's a fun game. But what we'll notice is as we get into these darker scenes, I actually do a bit of playing with the menus here and calibrate a bit more to give me kind of that, pull out a bit of that detail in the darkness. And you know, that's the problem with HDR, right? Is HDR typically processes things differently. and it doesn't get as bright in some areas, like the dark areas, as SDR because of the nature of how bright the panel is. This did pretty well. Even though it's a little dark for my taste, I still felt it did a better job than some of the other monitors that I've reviewed. Like, it retained its quality in picture, even though I brought the brightness up to 100%. You know, and as always, the beautiful skylines and beautiful geography of the game are just fantastic. As we pan around, we kind of look at the outside. It's a bit brighter. It's not too bright. It doesn't blow out the screen. You're getting a lot of detail, a lot of good color out there. You know, I'll say this monitor is handling it as well as like the GP850, the GP83 that I've reviewed in the past. You know, it's doing as well as any high level 1440p monitor does. So if you're one of the lucky few that stuck around to the end here, you're going to know that this next test is probably best suited for many of you watching. And this next test, I'm actually using my 5700 XT on a slightly different setup. So we want to test, you know, what are the frame rates we're getting? Is it doing well? Because it's a FreeSync premium monitor. It should pair up extremely well. But does it live up to that? Did Gigabyte deliver? So that's what we're going to test here. We're going to play a little bit of Vanguard on the 5700 XT and compare it back and forth between the 3090. So I just have to tell you that I slaughtered in this match. I don't know what my score was, but these guys couldn't keep up with me. I'm using the MP40 here. Quick little motion test as I pan around and look, you know, a slight bit of motion blur. We're receiving about 118 frames per second. But I do want to pause initially because one of the things I noticed was, because I'm using a kind of lesser performing card, the fidelity at further distances, the ability to render that and give me the best quality picture is kind of diminished. I'm not able to make out characters further away like I was on the 3090. But up close, I'm able to take those quick turns, take people out. Like in this scenario, I see two guys, they're about to turn on me, I turn on them, take one of the guys out, my buddy takes out the other one, and I just keep moving right along. And here's another double kill here, you guys. I'm kind of making my way around to the side of the houses here and having to duck a bit, dodge, dip, duck. I love that movie line. It's a fantastic movie line. But as I'm dodging and ducking, I'm taking one guy out. I round the corner. I see another guy shooting right at me. And as I pause on that interaction, zero ghosting, zero smearing, making out great detail. I'm not getting a bunch of funky stuff happening. And we're at about 88 frames per second. So what this kind of tells me is that FreeSync Premium paired up with this monitor actually has a better range of capability with the actual frames on the monitor. NVIDIA G-Sync works, but as we saw ourselves getting lower in the frames, like 60, 80 frames per second, it wasn't performing well. All right, we're gonna wrap up the video, you guys, but before we do, I wanna let you know that, hey, we have a new channel membership available. And if you're an avid watcher of the channel and you wanna see more of these videos come out, and maybe you wanna see exclusive ones behind the actual paywall, join the membership. It's a fantastic way to support the channel. By no means do you have to, but it would absolutely support the creation of more content, more consistent content, and give you direct access to content before it drops. It gives you collaboration capabilities with me, with everybody else working at Techcessory, and gives you input and insights onto what's happening on the channel. It helps drive the future of what this channel is to become. Go check out that membership. There should be a button down below the video here. Join up on that channel and let's get a conversation going. Otherwise, guys, let's wrap this up. And of course, we're going to talk about the downsides, the upsides, and if I would recommend this. So starting with the downsides, the one that was probably the most apparent to me was the fact that the DCI P3 only hit 90% on our SpiderX test, although they mark it 94%. And I think that has to do with the actual 350 peak nits of brightness, which is kind of the second downside as well. With 350 peak nits of brightness, most HDR performance is not going to be as good as it possibly could be. I mean, you do want it to be higher than that if you want a good HDR experience, which is why I left it off most of the time. Then the last downside is going to be that pixel overdrive. Those settings were a bit odd, like the balance did extremely well. Almost none of the settings performed at a very high level. I don't think that translated fully into real world gameplay, but just a little bit more fine tuning by Gigabyte, and I think we'd have a much better experience overall. Okay, now we get to talk about the good things here, because there are some awesome upsides to this monitor. And at 32 inches, it's only $449. And with the specs built in, everything involved with it, and the performance you get, $449 for a 32-inch monitor that has this level of performance is a fantastic price. The LG GP83 is more than that. The GP850 would be more than that. Any of the ASUS models, the Artemis 323 CQR, all of those are going to be more expensive traditionally than this. I would tell you that this is probably a better buy. Okay, that leaves kind of two more upsides in my opinion. And that's when you're doing high refresh rate games and you're actually receiving those higher frames per second. This thing performs fantastically, both across AMD and NVIDIA, bar none. Anytime I was receiving like 100, 120 frames per second and higher, my motion handling was perfect. I mean, it was spot on. And then of course, the kind of the cherry on top of all of that is the advanced calibration menus. I mean, Gigabyte, like I've known previously with the Gigabyte M28U, their calibration menus go above and beyond everybody else's. If you haven't tried them yet, you have to. Anyone who has a Gigabyte monitor with their newer menus, post a comment down below. Let people know how good their calibration menus are, but it makes all the world in difference when you're in game or doing some other workload on your PC. Well, that brings me to the end, and if I would recommend it to you or not. And the reality is that I would. You know, if you're looking for 1440p and you're looking for a reasonable price and you want a 32-inch monitor, Gigabyte has done really well for me, especially if you're using an AMD card. That FreeSync Premium with my 5700 XT performed extremely well. Now, if I'm using NVIDIA, I might look for something that is G-Sync certified, like the LG GP83 or GP850 in their 32-inch varieties, just because you're going to get that handshake and that wider range of variable refresh rate with G-Sync with a G-Sync monitor. So that's the only caveat I would have there. Hands down, probably top three on my list: this, the GP83, and the Artemis 323 CQR. So that's all I really have to say, you guys. Thanks for watching the video. It's been a longer one, I know that, but I am gonna put a playlist up above here that you guys can check out. It's gonna be a playlist of all the monitors I've reviewed on the channel. So if you're looking to purchase a monitor, you're looking for different options, check out that playlist. You can skip certain videos if you're not interested, or pinpoint other ones that you are interested in and make your own playlist if you want. Otherwise, I'm gonna put that playlist up there, and I'll catch you in the next video.